Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church in Columbia, South Carolina, where we're part of the ELCA. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. One of the lines I fairly often find myself saying in Bible studies and Sunday school classes is that you never know God is all you need until God is all you have. There's a lot of truth in that one. So often as we depend on everything else, but then when all that fails, we find our true hope in God who doesn't fail. I think that's one of the themes of the hymn, O God, our help in ages past. We often use that hymn at funerals, and if ever there is a time when we have nothing left but our dependence on God, the death of a loved one is it. The opening verse seems to speak of our troubles, but also the assurance that there's still hope in God. God has been our help in times past. Even more, God is our hope in times to come. In God, we have a second chance, a new beginning. Stuck in the mud, perhaps Jeremiah knew that. During this first full week of the new year, we are looking at stories from the Bible that you may or may not be familiar with, but which over and over speak of God giving new beginnings. New beginnings and fresh starts are a major theme in the Bible, expressing God's patient and steadfast grace for us and for how often we fail. God is indeed our hope for years to come. So let's turn to the story of Jeremiah in the mud and a man named Eben-Melech. However, as is often the case, I need to give you a little background to set the scene. You may be familiar with the fact that cities in those days were surrounded by walls intended to protect the city. Jerusalem was no exception. If an army attacked, they would lay siege to the city and wait them out until the people ran out of food or water, and then they would have to surrender the city. Jerusalem had a particular problem in that there were no sources of fresh water inside the walls. They had dug a hidden tunnel to a spring outside the wall, but they still needed water. One of the ways they addressed this need was that they built cisterns throughout the city. Cisterns were large holes that collected rainwater and stored it for people to use when they needed it, like in times when there was a siege. So cisterns were found throughout Jerusalem. The other piece of background information you need to know is that Jeremiah's message wasn't a popular one. Jeremiah saw that Babylon was coming to punish the people for how they had turned away from God, and saw that there was no escape. So Jeremiah was telling them, first, that the whole thing was their own fault, and no one likes to hear that. And second, since this was from God, there was no escape, they couldn't win, and the best thing to do was to surrender, duck their heads, and get their punishment over with. It's fair to say that no one liked that message. In fact, even Jeremiah said he didn't want to preach what he had to say either. Well, three guys with the names of Shephatiah, Gedaliah, and Pashur thought Jeremiah ought to be shut up. His words were demoralizing to the people and worse to the soldiers defending the city. So they got the king to give them permission to put Jeremiah where no one could find him. They threw him in a cistern to languish and die, presumably by drowning or starvation. The problem was it hadn't rained in a while, so there was no water in the cistern. Rather, the bottom of the cistern was full of deep mud, and Jeremiah sank down in the mud. He could have died there. Things looked bleak with no way out for him. But that's when Eben-Melech, a eunuch in the service of the king, found the king and said, "What they have done to Jeremiah isn't right." And the king gave Eben-Melech permission to rescue Jeremiah from the cistern. The Bible is very detailed at this point, perhaps showing the care that God has for God's people to the tiniest thing. It describes how Eben-Melech got some friends and some rope, but also how they got old rags and worn out clothes as well. Then they lowered the rope down to Jeremiah and threw down the clothes too, and told him to put the clothes over the ropes under his arms so he wouldn't get rope burns and would be more comfortable as they drew him out. Just so, Jeremiah got his second chance, his new beginning. Maybe an even better way to understand it is that God's message to the king and the people got a second chance too. You see, this whole experience didn't change what Jeremiah proclaimed. His message about how they had turned away from God and how they needed to return to God and how the Babylonians were God's punishment and it was coming no matter what was still true. And that's what Jeremiah kept saying. In the end, it turned out that even though it wasn't a message that any of them wanted to hear, Jeremiah's message was true. Perhaps this hidden story in the Bible is there for another reason as well. Perhaps it's there to give us a second chance. It might just be that we complacently prefer messages we want to hear, and that we need to open our ears to hear words about challenges. We need to hear words that challenge our lethargy and faith. As Jeremiah warned the people, perhaps now he warns us, and it would behoove us to listen and to act. We have a God who is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. We have a God who not only has been our help in ages past, but who is our hope for the future. We have a God of second chances. Thanks for sharing these moments with me, and remember to let this day belong to God.